Prelude to the Haoma offering. 1. 3 clean creatures, full of blessings, curse betimes, while yet invoking the cow, the horse, and then Haoma. The cow cries to her driver thus, "Childless be thou, shorn of offspring, evil-famed and slender followed, who foddered, verily dost not use me, but fattenest me, for wife or children, and for thy niggard, stingy, selfish meal." 2. The horse cries to his rider thus, "Be not spanner of the racers, stretch no coursers to full speed, do not stride across the fleetest. Thou, who dost not pray me swiftness, in the meeting thick with numbers, in the circuit wronged with men." 3. Haoma speaks his drinker thus, "Childless be thou, shorn of offspring, evil-famed and slander followed, who holdest me from full outpouring, as a robber, skulls and crushing, no head smiter, am I ever, holy Haoma, far from death." 4. Fourth, my father gave an offering, tongue and left eye chose Ahura, set apart for Haoma's meal. 5. Who this offering would deny me, eats himself or praise it from me, this which Mazda gave to bless me, tongue with left eye as my portion. 6. In his house is born no fire priest, warrior, netter, in chariot standing, never more the thrifty tiller, in his home be born Dahakas, Murakas, of evil practice, doing deeds of double nature. 7. Quick, cut off then Haoma's portion, gift of flesh, for Dati Haoma, heed lest Haoma bind thee fettered, as he bound the fell Turanian, Frangratian, the murderous robber, fast in iron, close surrounded, and the mild third of this earth. 8. Thereupon spake Zarathustra, praise to Haoma, made by Mazda. Good is Haoma, Mazda made. 9. Who to us is one hereupon to thee becomes 2, to be made to 3 for the 5, making of the 4, the 7, making of the 6th, who are your 9 in the decade, who serve you, and with zeal. 10. To thee, O holy Haoma, bearer of the ritual sanctity, I offer this my person, which is seen by all to be mature and fit for gift. To Haoma, the effective, do I offer it, and to the sacred exhilaration which he bestows, and do thou grant to me for this, O holy Haoma, thou that drivest death afar, heaven, the best world of the saints, shining, all brilliant. 11. Hashem Bohu, and etc. 12 through 15. Mayest thou rule at thy will, O Lord? And so on. 16. I confess myself a Mazdiasnian of Zarathustra's order. 17. I celebrate my praises for good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, for my thoughts, my speeches, and my actions. With chanting praises I present all good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, and through rejection or repudiate all evil thoughts and words and deeds. 18. Here I give to you, O ye bountiful immortals, sacrifice and homage, with the mind, with words, with deeds, with my entire person, yea, I offer to you the flesh of my very body as your own, and I praise righteousness, A blessing is righteousness called the blessed. Now, so it's not just whoever gets to drink, whatever, then they're sanctified, or whoever gets to eat, whatever, then they're, you got to, keep mentioning the goodness of the things of the world, the goodness of the best world, in the hereafter, the goodness of the spiritual beings, and of course, thanking God for it all. But there's a lot of ambiguity in the Vestan. But we're continuing the comment of the sacrifice commences portion. And it's not that Ahura was conceived of as having a body proper. The stars are elsewhere poetically described as his body. Other entities are said to be Tanu Mathra, and having the Mathra as their body, that is, incarnate in the Mathra. So they're incarnating these words. There's talk of the Purusha, the universal form. Well, God's not the universal form. He's not but known through this form of the universe, right? Disposing right as to mind. So he disposes our minds aright. As nourished and protected us, we're still in verse 1's commentary, and then we have bounteous spirit. The Pahlavi has Parvard, and elsewhere Spenta Inu is spoken of as his possession. The fire seems almost spoken of as one of the Amesha Spentas, because it's like a central ritual object. And, we're commenting on verse 2 here. In verse 3, the Lord of the ritual order. Let me make sure I got that right. Lords of the ritual, because ruling as chief at the time of their mention, and in the thin sense regarded as genie protecting all the ritual seasons and in time of their class. Visya presides over the vis. Savange over cattle. Genie implies the jinn. The jinn, some of them become da'eva. As we have indicated, da'eva is something a person or a jinn can become, like the Arabic shayateen. It's not something inherent. You're not, just like people say asura would be ungodly if you're taken over to India. But Devi is not the same thing. Let's not confuse that point. The Yas spoken, the spoken name into Raman Havastra. There were certainly a lot more hymns, whether secondarily the people who turned to angel worshipping the angels rather than being on the alliance. Gathas seem a lot more monotheist than the later material. The later material perhaps could be used monotheistically, but it's most certainly not. And there's, associations together, the Fradat, Vira, the best, and the... Oh. Wait. Okay. The righteousness, the best, and Hermazda's fire. These things are constantly associated together, because that's the point. They're all on the same side. You're joining that side. You're calling out the greatness of the side that you're on. Dath Yuma Huv equals H before Y. Okay. Dahuma, so it's the same word for that. Ahura is the maid, as opposed to that which might belong to Engra Me'inu, the counter creation. Okay, but that, that idea developed into the idea that the devil creates his own creatures that roam the earth and that sort of thing, rather than directing certain beings. Our furthest life, Ib Igea, and women who have many sons, and men and herds might be implied too. Well-shapen and stately, well-grown, and in verse 7, a thing completed. The suffix has the force here as in a close connection with ashyo. And then we talk about the genius of rectitude. Rashnu. And arstat is rectitude in another form, and literally to the moon within, showing little light, is the way they talk about, well, I guess the waxing moon. I mean the waning moon. In verse 8. In 9 we have Ma'idyo Zaremia. Which is listed separate phrase of the Holy Ritual Order. So we have, refer to that Afrinagon. And then there's the rutting season, the splendor and the strength of males. Well, that makes more sense to people. A lot of people won't know what the rutting season is. And 3 lords of the Holy Ritual Order in verse 10. Ha'ug first called attention to the striking coincidence with the Indian in the Aitareya and Satapatha Brahmanas in the Atharva Veda and in the Ramayana. The entities are brought up to the number of 33. The names differ somewhat, however. Well, you're speaking different languages. And the 2, Ahura and the Mithra, 11, in verse 11, the star Jupiter has been called Ormuzd by the Persians and Armenians. That may be indicated here as, well, the planets, as the stars are next mentioned. But who can fail to be struck with the resemblance to the Mitra Varuna in the Rig Veda? Possibly both ideas were present to the composer. And, as I'm saying, the same basic mythological framework was known to the Iranians, or some people would call them the Persians, as was known to the Hindus. So, and the eye of Ahura Mazda, like the language in ancient Egypt with the eye of, Ra and all that. Recall Kakshur, Mitrasya, Varun Asya, Agna. And the first day of the month is called Ahura Mazda. And we have to the Fervatius of the saints. Whether we're talking beings or not, or perhaps they're recording angels or something. But see, if they're the recording angels, then the legacy by mentioning the dead and all that stuff, you're continuing the legacy and the memory. So that's encapsulated in the Fervatia. And the first month is called for Vasha. And these are put for the particular day of celebration. And the Vendidad, as indicated verse, the revelation against the Evas in verse 13. The name being a contraction of Vida Eva Data. It will not be forgotten that Vendidad, although later put together, contains old Aryan myths which antedate Zarathustra, although in its present, greatly later form, Zarathustra is a demigod in it, and his name is involved in myth. And the long tradition, the long descent, is mentioned by Spiegel. From this mountain, the Iranian kings were later supposed to have descended, hence the mention of glory. Mount Ushe Derena. And glorious in sanctity, also in verse 14, we have observe the impossibility of the meaning comfort, our mere well-being here. And the unconsumed glory are possibly the unseized. The Pahlavi, a grift, Ner Yoseng has a greh itam havar, to eat, to may have mean seize originally. Rete, or rete, scenes without inflection. And, that's the rectitude. The persisting zeal, the state of activity. 15 talks about the religious man, particularly from, it's what is implied by both the Farsi Arabic meaning and the ancient Egyptian meaning of my first name here, Jafar, but this is not what we mean. This is, I just thought I'd throw that in. Should we say the departed saint here? Because that's who you really know is righteous, is the people that you can say finally. Because you can say somebody's a good person and then they're not a good person. Some people turn pretty quick. And so we move on. The springs of water in verse 16. The Pahlavi with its afkvar points here, perhaps to a better text. Recall Au Thakda Temka, or Au Sadda Ungo Aurem, and eternal stars without beginning, without beginning to their course, and so fixed. And fixed, that's not literal. Stars don't remain in one place. It's like, how, if the thing rotates throughout the year, how can a sun be fixed and mutable and cardinal in a literal sense? People knew they went around, and you saw them at different times in the year and different, so that just isn't. Now the pole stars, that could take quite a while to stop being the pole star. Then people might not get that one, but and self-determining, self-disposing. So they're not satellites. They have laws of their own motion in themselves. Of course, as we go out, we find the universe more and more as like, there's a pattern to its movement. It's like stars don't just move on their own. They're part of a system, and galaxies are part of a system, and galaxies and galaxies and galaxies and galaxies, and we find it goes out and out and out, and however far you out, it's just, there's all this system, even like in between. The divine order or eminence is expressed in the ritual and the faith. So see the faith, the rituals to bring out the faith or to express the faith. And so we have the time of Havana in verse 17. Not to the chief of Havana, possibly in the lordship, the time when it is especially the object of worship. Thus, each object of worship becomes, in its turn, the lord or chief of the ritual order. And the soul of the celebrant, or his client, is intended by the mention his own soul in verse 18. And in verse 21, if I have offended thee, compare Rigveda 7, or RV, is that Rigveda? 86, 3-6. Practice or induced, neglect or omitted portions of it is, of course, something we should watch for. If I have caused decrease, but rather instead you celebrate. So I invite for thee, all this stuff, the prayers and sacrifices upon. It's not quite this, or that go to isn't exactly the same as saying it has to be, in worship of these things. And the last note of this chapter is not verse 23, but verse 22. Is intending error. And so that the thought, word, and deed here were more than the mere semi-mechanical use of faculties in reciting the liturgy is clear. At the same time, all morality was supposed to be represented in the liturgy. The evil man would offend in thought, word, and deed if he recited it carelessly, with bad conscience, and as guilty as any known and unrepented sins. The moral and ceremonial laws went hand in hand. And the sacrifice continues. I desire to approach, verse 1, referring Yas to its more original sense. I read, I desire the approach to the various objects of worship, which may be correct as we understand the genius of each of several objects to be invoked. Aside from this, a desire to approach seems quite necessary to fill out the sense here. Many of the objects referred to were already present, although some, like the mountains, needed to be spiritually approached, are indeed invoked. The Zaathras seems hardly evocative here. If declined as other nouns, it would seem to be especially masculine. Compare Ahmiya, Zaathra below. I should feel constrained to regard it here as a masculine plural accusative. And compare Haoma and see the respectful, people talk about worshipful masters. They're not talking about these ascended master cults where somebody incarnates is like, I'm doing such a good favor to all of you, putting a face on God. Your face? I don't want your face on, you know how some of these New Agers are. Well, I mean, it's not funny. It's a serious issue. It's a serious issue that they're being rascals like that, as Prabhupada would say. But conjoined with this Zaathra with my praise, if Zaathra is not a locative masculine and may be used with the locative masculine pronoun irregularly, it would then equal Zaathreya. The letter is often simply the pahlavi, a little lengthened, and equivalent to Ya, a Ya. It does not merely stand for Ya, a Ya, but it sometimes is the correct writing for those letters. Useless repetitions are curtailed. And in this Zaathra, if Zaathra is not a locative masculine and may be used with the locative masculine pronoun irregularly, it would then equal Zaathreya. The letter is often simply the pahlavi, a little lengthened, and equivalent to Ya, a Ya. does not merely stand for Yah, a Yah, but is sometimes the correct writing for those letters. Wait. Not useless. Then why in the world do you put the same note twice in a row? Useless repetition. That's rather than having an effect between and all that sort of stuff, and certain sounds and that sort of thing. Yeah. Why the same comment in the same chapter? That's okay. Sometimes the pot, a palm, is what we have in the place of a palm napat in verse 5. And in verse okay, there's one more note here. Oh, there's springs of water in verse 16. And Yasna 1:16. And the comment for the Yasna advances to the naming of the objects of propitiation, and likewise Emerit at, the guardian of the plants and woods. Spiegel has observed with truth that Emerit at and Ha'ur Vatat may represent severally all the fruits and the liquids offered. And the fresh meat, the modern Parsis, Ha'ug following, render butter, but Spiegel is inclined to discredit this later tradition, holding that the flesh was originally intended, but it is becoming disused in India, particularly post, somewhat despite the Muslimin. The animal sacrifices were, for the most part, stopped in India, basically despite them, you could say. But the ruling class didn't have the monopoly anymore. That was, again, part of the reason why they did that. But vegetarianism isn't actually as Vedic as people think it is. But milk was substituted, hence the error. Ga'us, Huda'u, in its primary sense, meant, of course, the kind of the blessed endowment. And we talk about the Haoma juice, the para Haoma. But if it's para Haoma, we're talking beyond, say, a ritual intoxicant is, if this is used, and I'm not saying that one should short step the process and throw an intoxicant into the mix of one's ritual practices, but these things are enhancements of the ritual. It's not the whole thing. There are things that are included, so that's important to, so better than the fresh meat. Fluids are the chief objects of attention here. So these ceremonies where you have the Haoma are the if you represent it as the intoxicant, then something beyond the intoxicant that does sort of the same thing, right? Or perhaps that's just the term for when they sweeten it. They add milk, because opium and ephedrine and marijuana and probably some of the other plants don't make it taste too good. Maybe some of the plants they put with it. But anyways, there would be, certainly just like in India, there would be the sweetened, they try honey and milk would be put with it, and the Haoma water and fresh milk with praise. And then with the girdle is the binding in verse 4. and the exact regulation of the Ratu, we have An Gu Yam, or Rath Wam, stand in relation to Ahu and Ratu. Oh, it's Angu Yam Rath Wam, as a pair, just like Ahu and Ratu are a pair. So also the Pahlavi, Ahu, Oi, and Radi, and there you're saying has Svamitamka, Gurut Amka, and Yesti is the note we have with, okay, we're further on. The Yast of Mithra in verse 5 is mentioned. Yesti seems used of an special yast here, and subsequently as genitives intrude among datives, the form possibly taking the place of the words for propitiation of. Here, Yas 10 may be referring to it. Yas 13 is the Fervashes of the saints. Verse 8 here. So we're working down the line, the Zarathustra tema. So the person in charge of passing on the message of Zarathustra, you would say. And there's a rubric, 36. Okay, 24. The Zaatar speaks. One would think that the sentence was intended to be dictated to the Ratu to be repeated. That is, if the rubric is correct, the sentence to be uttered by the priest seems difficult. And the present or infinitive, so the priest speaks, the Zaatar speaks, and the offering takes place. We start the comment with talking about the good deeds. The fact that somewhat of a more technical samata, sukta, skrita adheres to these expressions in this place must not for a moment induce us to suppose that their deeper meaning was lost. All good thoughts, words, and deeds culminated in the ritual as in an enlightened high ecclesiasticism. They were nourished by it, and not least in it. The expressions here vary.